Well, this is a different kind of podcast episode that is coming your way. I know that I have 2 parts to publish at the moment and hopefully a third part. This first one is a history interpretation of somebody's history. So what happened was I gave this person an extensive form to fill out and asked them to answer the questions in as much detail as they could. And when I received the answers back, I jumped on a Zoom by myself and pulled the history up, and I interpreted in the moment. So I don't read my histories beforehand. The information comes to me best when I'm just in the moment. And I will read people's words and the way they describe their issues. I look into the conditions that they have. I take note of what sides and what areas of their body may be affected. So the more detail, the better, and the more specific it is, the better. There were some little bits and pieces missing in this. However, I was still able to give a general overview, and if it was a specific injury to the physical part of the body, then I would talk about the left and the right side and what this perhaps meant. So we did actually follow up. So part 2 of this podcast that will be coming out was we decided to have a conversation off the back of this history interpretation. So when I provide this interpretation, I always ask people to sit with a sensation, take note of what comes up, and observe what memories, people, or events start to come into their mind. So in part 2 of the podcast, we had a follow-up conversation because I wanted to clarify some things. And the purpose of this is that if I'm going to put it out there and some of you are going to have your history interpreted, it would be worth listening to this and just take note of the parts that were missing, because I want you to get really specific. So yeah, we had a conversation around what landed for this amazing person and how the dots were connected for them. Because when I do history interpretations, when I'm working with people, I am taking note of the physical and emotional elements, human, energetic, and also working with Eastern philosophies of Ayurvedic doshas and chakras. So this is where you get to see how my mind operates. And this is just one person's history. Everybody's is different. And I should note that this person's interpretation, even though you may have some of the same conditions, your experience, your emotional makeup around it is going to be completely different. This is a different kind of share. This is something that I've always wanted to do. And of course, I expect that everyone who listens to my podcast will take a level of responsibility. This was an individual interpretation. It will not be your interpretation. And if you have got any serious medical issues or any concerns with your physical, mental body or otherwise, then I do advise that you seek professional help. So I'm very grateful to be able to share this. So please listen responsibly. And if you do desire to have your history interpreted, then there is a link in the notes. Availability for this will come up depending on when I have space and time to give my full attention to interpreting someone's history. It can take anywhere between 30 minutes to an hour. And I ask with everything that you do with me that it is intentional, because I used to do this just for my practitioners on emotional body training. And there was just so much learning in it, and I saw the doors open for people. So it is just to create awareness for you and perhaps see some of the blind spots that you're not able to see. But go into a history interpretation with intention and be prepared that some things can come up for you. So the link will be in the show notes, and if there is availability, you will be able to book this. It is not an in-person consult. You send your answers to me, I will record my response to you, and this can take up to 2 or 3 weeks, and then this response will get emailed to you to listen to. Okay, so I hope you enjoy listening to this history interpretation, and just remember that this is an individual interpretation for this person, and it will be followed up with a part 2 where we have a conversation around this history interpretation, and then hopefully a part 3 where this person has very vulnerably allowed me to share a facilitated release. So we did actually do one, but it is not one that is appropriate to share on the podcast. It's going to go in my practitioner training and just working out what other programs it may be able to be published in. So yeah, releases can go really deep, and just going to be mindful of what can be shared on a free platform like a podcast. And yeah, some of it might have trigger warnings as well. But there is just a huge variety of releases that can be facilitated. So I'll let you get listening to this history interpretation, and I hope you enjoy. Okay, let's dive in and do this history interpretation. So I always like to just dive straight into these and not pre-read them and go with the flow. And this really helps me understand whoever I'm working with on a much deeper level and helps me to connect the dots. So I always advise that when you are listening to this, to be fully present and be aware when any sensation comes up in your body. It might be that you feel hot, you feel cold, maybe you're aware that you're fidgeting a little bit more. Just sit with it and just observe. You don't need to take notes. I recommend that if you do want to note anything down, that you have a re-listen. So just try and stay in your body as I'm going through this history, and just be aware if you have any reactions happen. Okay, so first of all, what are your main concerns right now, physical, mental, or otherwise? Chronic pain and hormone imbalance. And your main desires are to release weight and release pain. So I'm sure this will come out as I read through as to what the chronic pain is and anything else. Okay. So any physical issues, injuries that you've had in the past? Geez, I've had so many. My biggest challenge is because of my hyperlaxity in my joints, which has caused my fascia to harden to hold me together. I also deal with autoimmune issues, allergies, asthma, psoriasis, alopecia, which is loss of hair, hot and cold Uticaria, which is like skin rashes, Hashimoto's thyroiditis, an autoimmune thyroid condition, fibromyalgia, and some believe Ehlers-Danlos syndrome. This is all super interesting as I'm reading this. I also have dry eyes, IBS, osteochondroma. One had to be removed from the inside of my left scapula, severe allergies to fish and shellfish, stomach allergy to avocados, mouth allergies to cherries, red apples, pears, peaches, and a host of other foods. I roll my ankles all the time and have significant osteoarthritis in my spine. When I was 40, I had 5-level cervical laminoplasty to relieve severe stenosis, narrowing in my spine. Last year, I healed myself of 5 ulcers, stomach ulcers, caused by ibuprofen. Since having to stop taking NSAIDs, non-steroidal anti-inflammatories, my pain has been worse. I've had radiofrequency lesioning of the facet joint nerves in my neck and lower back. I'm postmenopausal. I still have big hormonal waves, eyesight, inflammation, water retention, and sometimes mood issues twice a month. I'm still having hot flashes despite being on hormone replacement. Okay, so let's work through all of these, and some of these areas I dive into a little bit more detail with my history questions around the body systems. So this is where I start to decipher, is this physical? Is it emotional? Is it human? Is it energetic? Is it a chakra or a dosha imbalance? And try and bring all of the pieces together based on the history that has been presented to me. And I am always interested as well as to which side is affected, unless it's both, because there's energetics behind which side of our body gets affected. So if it's not specified, I'll just get really general. And I will also talk, if I feel it's applicable, to the specificity of the side. So my biggest challenge is hyperlaxity in my joints, which has caused my fascia to harden to hold me together. So hyperlaxity, hypermobility, and you mentioned later, some believe I have Ehlers-Danlos syndrome, which is a congenital condition that affects how lax our ligaments are, and it can be graded differently. Now, what's really interesting is I've worked with a handful of people with Ehlers-Danlos syndrome, and they've been diagnosed with it when they start getting problems. And so those problems can be anything from dislocating joints to rolling things like your ankles all of the time. And I always find this interesting because some people get diagnosed with it in their teens, their 20s, 30s, 40s, 50s. And I think, well, you've been born with this. Why is it all of a sudden giving you an issue? Unless it was giving you issues when you were very young. And some people can just be very mobile, regardless of being diagnosed with anything. So it's sometimes good to search and be given a diagnosis. And sometimes that can really help us. And other times it can really hinder us. And it just depends where you're at on your journey. So if we just say, okay, you've got this laxity in your body, when I see that it's happening in your joints, I'd be curious as to what particular joints, but even if it was all over the body, the joints for me represent the solar plexus, which is about our sense of identity, trust, confidence, self-esteem, power, authority, and ego. And this is where a lot of people get stuck in the world, is showing up as their true selves. And this is because it could be because of experiences where we've had, in Australia and New Zealand, we call it tall poppy syndrome, that someone's rising up and then we cut them down. And fear of criticism and judgment. And that can be because we have criticized and judged people in the past. But as we step into our truth and we have opinions, of course, they're not going to make everyone happy, but we fear the criticism and judgment that can come with that. So a big thing that's coming up here is solar plexus so far, and we'll just see if it comes up again throughout the history. So several autoimmune issues. And this is where I find the emotional work really interesting, especially because there are so many autoimmune conditions out there, and some of them just don't have names anymore. And for me, even if there is a particular type of autoimmune condition, I'm always curious as to how does it actually specifically affect that person. So if I go through the first one, there's allergies, a lot of food allergies. And even if this wasn't related to an autoimmune condition, although allergies are governed by our immune system, when people have got multiple food sensitivities and allergies, even if it's not diagnosed, but they know that they just react and they start restricting their diet because they are having these reactions, I would always love to start doing release processing, helping them process their emotions first. Because I always say that processing your emotions will usually shift about 95% of the issues. And then you're left with the 5% that maybe you need to medicate, have surgery for, or intervene with supplements. So when our body is stressed, our immune system is going to react, and it's not unusual for us to become highly sensitive and reactive to lots of things, not just food, but to people around us and the environments around us as well. Okay, so asthma, and there is this triad, I can't remember what it's called, sorry, but being born with things like allergies, hay fever, asthma, and eczema as an immune response. But if we just sort of separate these out a little bit, they will come together. So anything that affects the chest area, I think of the lungs and the chest, the heart area, and this really governs emotions around love, conditional, unconditional love, connection, belonging. The lungs in particular have to do with sadness, grief, and loss, which comes in many forms, not just people who have passed away in our lives. It can be the life that we once had. It can be so many variations of grief and loss. But what I'd be interested in is, well, how often does this asthma actually affect you? Because we can have a history of things, but it doesn't actually affect us. So interested in at what level does this actually affect you? Psoriasis is super interesting, and I think of this in doshas and chakra terms. So with the psoriasis, the skin condition, I am always more interested with conditions, whatever they might be, is where is the location that's affected. So psoriasis can affect people anywhere. It can be on their scalp, it can be in their ears, it can be on their fingernails, it can be on their elbows, their legs, anywhere and everywhere. So I'll break this down, but if I don't know the specific area of where the psoriasis is affecting the body, then I don't go into the emotions, but that's how I would use this condition to interpret what emotions are being stored in the body. But it's also very interesting because alopecia is next on the list, which is losing hair. And so again, this can happen with stress, but I'm always interested in the underlying emotions and using the other Eastern philosophies that I pull on as well. So with the psoriasis and alopecia, I already see a link with a Pitta dosha type. So without going into this too much, some people are aware of their dosha constitution, some people aren't. There are these 3 dosha types. We have all 3 of them within us, but some people are more dominant in 1 or 2. And what I love about the doshas is that it can tell us the really early signs before someone is actually going to manifest a disease state. So it's not just the physical ailments, but also the mental imbalances that people might have, and also the environments that they thrive in and get triggered or activated in as well. So environment can really affect our conditions and state of health too. So psoriasis is very much a Pitta condition. So usually it's hot, it's red, sometimes it can get really itchy. And this is the nature of a person who's very Pitta. They're fueled by fire and water, and you stick them in a hot and humid environment, and sometimes all of their health issues, their mental state can just flare. So I would combine that with where is the psoriasis affecting in the body. And then alopecia, so loss of hair, is also, yes, it can be stress related, but it's also something that Pittas will tend to get. So early balding, but alopecia can just be temporary hair loss, and then it grows back, and then you go through another period of time and the hair loss happens again. So I'd be really interested in finding out, when does the psoriasis flare? What goes on in your life? And have you made that link with your emotional state, events in your life, and how your body is responding? Because our body is always a really amazing barometer, but it can be hard when we have multiple conditions that cause us pain and we get caught up in the pain. So same as the alopecia, which I assume is a stress-related thing that's happened episodically throughout your life, is I'd be interested what was going on at that time when you were losing your hair. And I can also look at this at a chakra level. So your scalp, where your hair grows out of, is your crown chakra. And crown chakra is about that connection with higher self, the universe, higher belief systems. And sometimes it's like there's this balding that's happening to just like take it all away and just have that that connection. There's no block, there's no hair there. And some people, as I said, get psoriasis just on their scalp, and it's almost like cradle cap. It's just like suffocating that connection. So hot and cold urticaria. So this is like skin rashes. They might be itchy, they might not be, they might be bumpy. I'm not too sure if this is that it gets triggered by hot and cold, But whenever there's like skin conditions, psoriasis, acne, eczema, or just redness of the skin, again, I would come down to location. Hashimoto's thyroiditis is really interesting, and I have definitely worked with people with all sorts of autoimmune conditions, which I personally never thought would be able to shift. I thought you have to live with them. And I do have a number of clients who live in remission, but I have had some amazing shifts with clients where it still blows me away that they have been able to shift out of their autoimmune condition, no longer have markers, no longer have imbalances. It's just crazy. So this is why I love the power of being aware of this stuff. So then you can, if you choose, start to process your emotions. So Hashimoto's thyroiditis, I'd be looking at the thyroid, the location, and also this condition, Hashimoto's. And I have had a client who has actually come out of Hashimoto's autoimmune state. So I look at the thyroid, and this is something interesting that's landed a lot more for me recently, having, for some reason, worked with a lot of thyroid clients. Thyroid is this gland that is in the throat neck area. And I can look at it on an organ level. And the thyroid just very basically controls a lot of things around metabolism, including weight, which is one of the issues. But I notice that anyone with thyroid conditions, no matter what they are, they usually have something around communication and speaking up. And I know that when I used to have throat issues, I thought, I'm going to public speak and then all of my issues will go away. But it wasn't that. It was deeper on an energetic level about really speaking my truth. So sometimes we think we know, and then through the experience, we realize that, no, that isn't it. And it leads us down a path of exploring more. So this is speaking up, having a choice. So it may not necessarily be with how you're showing up now. It could have to do with that, but it can be past emotions that weren't expressed, weren't voiced, and they're getting stored in this gland. It's also the throat chakra. If I go back to that, that is about lies. It can be hearing lies, or it can be lies that you've told that maybe you are, you still think about these events. And then Hashimoto's thyroiditis is when the thyroid function starts to just slow down. So metabolism slows down. So this could be also the reason for weight gain or a lot of difficulty losing weight. And then fibromyalgia. So what I'm hearing is that I'm under the assumption that this person is actually very high in their Pitta nature constitution. But what's happened is something's been tipped out of balance at some point from some event, some trauma, or multiple cumulative events. And then they've gotten into this kapha excess state. So Hashimoto's thyroiditis, things start to grow, your weight starts to gain, everything starts to slow down. And fibromyalgia, I also classify in a kapha state. It's when we get all this like random pain around the body, and it's just very chronic and sluggish, and can be associated with fatigue. Again, every condition will affect people differently. So I see that something's been tipped out and it's caused one of the doshas to go into excess, but I'm looking at it at the chakra level as well as physical, emotional, human, and energetic. Okay, so dry eyes, heart chakra. So eyes are the secondary area for the heart chakra. And I already talked about that link with the asthma in that heart chakra area. So it can be that when we aren't addressing the primary, that our body has to give us signs in the secondary areas that things can manifest in the body. IBS, digestive issues. So if you've got this Pitta predisposition, usually the IBS, because it could be constipation, it could be diarrhea, it's like hot diarrhea because Pitta is very associated with heat. Osteochondroma, so yes, I would look at the location of it, left scapula, so that's the shoulder blade at the back, and this is also in the heart chakra. So I think of this area as something in the past, something around love, conditional, unconditional love. This is usually related to family. There's also a very strong link with the sacral chakra, so relationships, but connection, belonging, forgiveness. And we can't move to forgiveness until we have processed the demons of the heart chakra, which is betrayal, jealousy, hatred, sense of injustice. resentment is the other emotion as well. And then I'd be thinking, okay, does this have something to do with females in the life? Because it's the left side, but it's not just females being left and feminine. It's also what is there around the feminine self. The feminine energetics is intuition, creativity, emotional expression. Okay, and then just recapping fish and shellfish allergies, I'm kind of just lumping that in with these allergies to foods, the avocado, the mouth allergies to cherries, red apples, peaches, and a host of other foods. It's kind of like when the list goes on, I wouldn't even start trying to address the allergy side of things. I would just go into processing emotions and see what starts to shift. Sometimes we also need to start processing our emotions around how we feel around the conditions that we have and how we either live with them and adjust with them, or do we start to get very controlling in our life? Like, we can't go here, we don't want to speak up and say that I can't have this in my meal, and so on. Okay, and rolling my ankles all the time. This is where I'm more interested in which side of the ankle is affected, because we have a left and a right. In general, ankles are also solar plexus, and that identity, trust, self-esteem, confidence, and so on that I mentioned earlier. So you can already hear how things are showing up multiple times. And even though it seems like there's so many things going on, they're actually linked. So the ankles are that joint before our feet, and our feet really are about our sense of grounding. Are we at peace with our physical location, the geography in which we live in, the environment, or are we moving around all the time? Then if I just go briefly into right ankle, is very much about our masculine and more so around our career direction. Do we feel stable in our career direction? And some of us are making shifts and we feel a little bit wobbly on the way until we settle into it, feel a little bit unsure as we step into new pathways. And sometimes I've had people that have had chronic ankle issues or injuries that just don't recover. And all of a sudden they quit their job and their ankle pain goes away. And all that physical stuff just wasn't hitting anything on the head. So that's just an example, but it has very much to do with career, stability, place, home, and base. And then left ankle would have to do a lot with your sense of stability and understanding and knowingness and embodiment of your feminine self. So again, the intuition, creativity, emotional expression, and then sometimes it is around relationships as well. So when I was 40, I had 5 levels in my cervical spine laminoplastied for severe stenosis in my spine. So I'm looking at this more as, okay, there's a thyroid, there's this whole neck, throat area thing going. So there's something about expression, choice, speaking up. And just know that some things will land and some things won't. And when they land, they might land in a couple of years and you will remember this. Okay, so last year I healed myself of 5 ulcers caused by ibuprofen. So yeah, definitely we want to get out of pain, and taking a little bit of medication every now and then is okay. But then we have to look at when we're taking too much. Now, ulcers, I would also link to the Pitta dosha. And when people are, before they get to the ulcer state, because the ulcer state is kind of the crisis point, they will generally have heartburn and reflux. Now, I don't know if this has been mentioned on this history, but this is what I find when I interpret people's history. I tell them the stuff that they haven't written down because they thought it was insignificant. But again, before you get ulcers, they don't just come on. Usually there are earlier signs, but we're in too much pain to pay attention to it. So ulcers, very pitta, and yes, it is a side effect of taking non-steroidal anti-inflammatories, and some people are more sensitive than others. And then all of a sudden, the other pain, the other underlying pain gets worse. So I'm actually still not too sure where the pain in the body is. Okay, so more work operations on the neck and also lower back. So there's a lot of neck and throat stuff going on here, thyroid and all of the surgeries and the stenosis that's been happening in the neck. And there's some osteoarthritis in the lower back. Look, it depends on how much discomfort it's giving someone, because imaging doesn't necessarily correlate with the level of pain or discomfort that we might feel or our function. But I think that probably if you had something done, you were having pain. So I'm always curious as to, did this actually relieve anything? And there are times that we're going to have to intervene, have conventional medicine, surgeries. I'm not against them, but what were the signs that maybe were earlier and a step back that from here on in we can be aware of, so we prevent further stuff happening? Okay, postmenopausal, but still having big hormonal flashes, eyesight, inflammation, water retention. Okay, so hormones are really expensive, especially like menopausal transition, because some people just sail through menopause and other people really struggle. And I usually associate this with their level of stress, which isn't always just felt mentally. It can just be expressed in the body. And hormone fluctuations, I think, are just a really good way. It's a physiological stress on the body. It's a really good way of just highlighting what we may not have yet processed and brings it to the surface. So eyesight, I talked about eyes being the secondary area of the heart chakra. General inflammation, it's like, right, Pitta, the heat, the fire. Maybe there's like being quick to anger going on here as well. Water retention, I put in that kapha state, like everything's growing, the weight, the Hashimoto thyroiditis, the fluid retention, because kapha is very much governed by earth, like this being solid structure, and water and fluid. So people can get issues like the fluid retention. Okay, sometimes mood issues twice a month. And yeah, so still having the hormonal fluctuations despite having medication. It's like, man, there's something that really wants to come through that does not want to be suppressed. You've tried changes to diet, pain management, massage, dry needling, acupuncture in the past. And sometimes these can work temporarily. Sometimes our practitioners move on. I'm always just interested to hear, what have people done? How long have they stuck with it? And did you have any bad experiences? Because sometimes we have bad experiences with practitioners and we actually need to note that down as something to process. Okay, so with family history, this one's quite brief. So cancers and heart disease. I generally ask this not because I believe that there are hereditary conditions that get passed down. It's more so to find out, where does someone sit in their belief system with this? And this is all about epigenetics. You can inherit the genes, but you don't have to show them. You don't have to turn them on. So many people live in fear because they've got a strong family history of certain cancers that they are destined to get it. And I say, no, this can depend a lot on your lifestyle, your environment, your emotional health, the level of stress, physical, physiological, and emotional that you put on your body as to whether or not you manifest this disease state. And then, of course, there are certain dosha types that are more at risk of having certain conditions over others. So not everyone is destined to have thyroid conditions, even if they have a family history, unless you're a very similar dosha type. And I say use that as a motivation to work on this and prevent it. I also ask about this because of people's relationships that they have with their parents and grandparents. And I want to find out, how much emotion is there? People often don't divulge everything in a history. And, you could have a terrible relationship with your grandparents and your parents, or you could have such a loving one, and their death, if they are not here in this physical world anymore, can be something that you really need to process as well. Okay, medications, there is a long list. I won't go into the whole list, but I can see that there are quite a few, from hormonal and pain relief and sedative type medications, bioidentical thyroids, thyroid medication, and things to help symptomatically. And you take supplements, magnesium, calcium, citrusal, probiotics, collagen, and potassium. Okay. I would really look at the list when people have got a lot of medications going on, and then, what medications are we taking because of side effects? And it's always a good idea to have your medications reviewed, just to see, are they the best ones for you to be on right now. And some people are going to need to do processes around their medications and how they feel. Like, do they feel like they rattle? Are they sick of taking them? Because sometimes, even if we're under the care of a practitioner, we can just take the stuff so that we feel like we're actually doing something. Yet actually a lot of the root is around emotions. That's not to say supplements aren't great, but we've got to look at when we're trying to grab at things because we feel like we're doing something. Okay, so there's a few injuries here. So childhood trauma, ages 3 to 13. I don't have anything specific around that, but it would be, okay, well, what happened? What was your parents' response? Were you looked after? Did you feel supported? Broken wrist, age 9, broken wrist, age 10. I would be interested in the side. So the wrists are the secondary area for the sacral chakra, and usually this governs emotions around relationships in life, and the wrists are about control. Now, if people have had broken bones and it was just like, yeah, it was fine, nothing of it, then I don't really take it into consideration. But I'm throwing this in here because I've just got the list of the breaks and the injuries. But I'm like, is this the same wrist that got broken? Which side is it as well? Surgery for the osteochondroma at age 16. Again, how was this dealt with? Did you feel supported? Did you feel safe? Is there anyone that you need to release on, even the surgeon? You know, how did they deliver the news? Because not everyone has the best bedside manner when they deliver news like this. Neck surgery, age 40, wrist surgery, age 46. Is that as a result of the broken wrists in the past? Shoulder surgery, age 48. Okay, so I'm going to go into the shoulders here. I'm not too sure which side, so I'm going to cover both of them. Shoulders, I don't really put into a chakra, but I say that overall, their theme is about sense of responsibility. And we say cliche things like, I feel like I've got the weight of the world on my shoulders, or it feels like the weight of the world has just been lifted. My shoulders are tense, or wow, they feel so relaxed. So it's about sense of responsibility. And often we put a big sense of responsibility on ourselves. No one else is actually expecting this of us. Right shoulder is the masculine side. And one of the masculine themes is around being physical, doing, giving out of that energy. And so if people have right shoulder issues, now we could be really lax in the shoulder, or we can be very stiff, but I won't go into too many details there. So when there's right shoulder issues, the general theme is you're giving out too much of your physical energy. You're actually using your physical body and you're doing things, and maybe your body's giving you pain. Maybe it isn't. Maybe it just gives you an injury that knocks you down, and it's telling you just stop, keep some of that energy to yourself. Now, if it was the left shoulder tends to be that people can dump their emotional stuff on you. There are some people where they're just like, I don't know why people tell me their life story. I get that all the time. People just like dump their life story on me. I actually find it fascinating though. But when your left shoulder gives you issues, it's usually because you've got enough of your own emotional cup to deal with. Your emotional cup's full, yet you're not having the boundary. It's also about boundaries, both of the shoulders, to say no. No to the physical work if it's the right side, and no, I cannot hear your emotional stuff right now because I'm glazing over because I've got my own emotional shit to deal with. So it's left shoulder. Boundaries, saying no, which most people have to get better at. Many fibroidectomies. So I would assume that this is growth in the fibroid growth in the uterus, and these have been removed. And if there's many, they keep on coming back. So this is the sacral chakra area. It's the uterus, it's the womb. And I'm interested to know like when the weight gain happened, because this is kapha, the kapha dosha excess. And when people are kaphas, they have this tendency to express kaphaness, which I'll go into. I've just made that word up. But I talked about how it sounds like you have got this kapha excess going on, the weight gain, the fibromyalgia, the water retention, and I would class fibroids in this as well. So a kapha type person tends to be that more solid build. They tend to carry a bit of weight, but they look okay. But when they get really out of balance, they get big, and anyone can get into a kapha state. They get big and they grow things. Boobs get big on females, they grow fibroids. So this is the dosha aspect. And mentally, when our physical body changes, our mental state and the way we express ourselves can change as well. So when someone is in this state, quite often kafirs will start to ruminate, they procrastinate, they hold on to things, they hoard, they have attachment to relationships and jobs and people, and they stay in this low level of comfort because they know they can survive this way, rather than maybe going through temporary discomfort to help them break through a situation. I once had a friend who's a TCM practitioner say that for them, fibroids are just pure anger. And I would look at this chakra location. It's in the uterus, it's in the womb, it's in the sacral chakra. Again, I'd be going, right, what is there about relationships? So again, I don't know what else is coming, but let me dive into the sacral chakra because I haven't picked that apart like I did the solar plexus or the heart chakra. So the sacral chakra governs our relationships in life. So normally listed out for people so that they can start to have the pennies drop. Parents, extended family, grandparents, the good relationships, the bad relationships, siblings who are no longer here. It can be your intimate relationships, unrequited love from past relationships. It can be the affairs. You might have been the one who cheated on someone and feel really guilty about it or okay about it. And you might have been cheated on as well and have a lot of resentment and hatred around that and never got over it. So that's something to process. It can have to do with the fertility journey. So I always mention miscarriages and abortions. And these are things that barely ever get spoken about openly. So miscarriages, abortions, stillbirths go in there as well. Maybe there was a fertility journey to try and get pregnant and it never happened that needs to be processed. The yearning after kids. It can be the existing relationships with children that aren't going so well, be they toddlers, kids, teenagers, or adults, grown adults. And then it can extend into workplace relationships, and the sort of energetic of the sacral chakra is around sex, money, and power. So it has this knock-on effect that when you have got these historical relationship stuff that you have not processed, which you may not have known how to in the past, you may have gone into freeze mode to protect yourself, is that it can have a knock-on effect with your sex, money, power. So I just kind of say that off to the side because generally people don't understand that until they're deep in the work. The energetics really happens when you're doing the work. Right now, this is a slightly intellectual process, maybe a little bit embodied if you're noticing the sensations come up. And some people will block things hard when they're listening to this. They can get tired, sleepy because the body's not ready to hear it. Okay, hospitalization for neck surgery. We sort of went over that with the throat chakra. Then I get into asking about the systems, so the gut. It's good now that I got off the NSAIDs and take Citracel twice a day, fiber. Okay, good. And what is interesting though, is that I work with a lot of people with constipation or gut issues, and they've done all sorts of things and they're taking things for it. And then they start releasing their emotions, processing their emotions, and their bowel habits start to regulate, or they really notice how their bowel responds. I always talk about the pees, poos, and vomits. And you know, most people know about nervous poos or holding on to their poos because they don't want to let go. So regular bowel motions, 2 to 3 per day, that's great, as long as they're well formed. I tend to hold a ton of fluid and need to take a diuretic twice a day. So that's that fluid retention. So the female system, I mentioned my cycle a few questions back, that's all good. Periods used to be very painful. Haven't had bladder infections for decades, but used to get some bacterial overgrowth from time to time. Okay, so I always like asking about bladder infections, and still what I would say is, okay, that time decades ago when you used to get them, do you remember why they happened? Because usually it's about literally being pissed off with someone or a situation, and you can be pissed off with yourself as well. So periods, even though you're postmenopausal, you're still having some hormonal stuff go on. And this is where I would question, what was your relationship with your period? Especially when it's painful. Sometimes we're like, I don't want you anymore. You can just disappear. I don't like you. And then when I have some women who are in medically induced menopause, or you hit menopause, all of a sudden you actually miss the hormones. and realize the opportunity that you had with them. So period stuff going on and painful periods, I then still go back to the sacral chakra. So I'm like, okay, there is relationship stuff going on here, but I don't know who with. Okay, so the cardiovascular system, nothing except when I first lie down at night, my heart can race. Okay, so this is where I think of masculine, feminine. Day is masculine, night is feminine. And sometimes people don't have their panic attacks or their breakdowns until they stop at nighttime and they go to sleep. So I want to encourage people to process their emotions during the day, in the moment, as soon after an event. Now, a lot of the time we've got to start with everything that's happened in the past before we can just keep processing in the moment, so that we don't start filling up our emotional cup and having it overflow all the time. So when people say, I notice that my heart races, or I'm waking up all the time, or I'm getting nightmares, dreams, night terrors that are very vivid, then I usually put it down to stuff is not being processed during the day. It might not be about the present day, but again, it can be the past. And so what does that feeling of heart racing give you? Do you know that it's just going to go away? But this can be a physiological response that all of a sudden you're resting. Now I'm safe. Now I can process things. And I'm going to do it in the form that your heart races. So yeah, that's just something that I would note. Respiratory, history of asthma, reactive airways, prone to bronchitis and laryngeal, pharyngeal reflux, which makes my asthma bad. Oh, I forgot to list, I take omeprazole every day per my gut doctor's instructions. So that can be because of the history of ulcers, which is that very Pitta nature, also, you know, perhaps medically induced. Or yeah, taking it as a preventative. Sorry, I just got lost in a train of thought there. Okay. We talked a little bit about the asthma earlier on, so I won't go into that. So diet, we talked about the allergies earlier on, and there's a few. Obviously avoid the things right now that don't work for you, but I would just kind of encompass this in, let's just see what happens if you actually were to process a bunch of emotions. I mean, you may never, it depends how severe your allergy is, of course, like you may never want to eat these foods again, and you're actually okay without them. But it's also making sure that you're not developing new sensitivities and new allergies, because otherwise diet can become incredibly restrictive. Gluten makes me hold more water, dairy makes me phlegmy. Okay, so because you're in a kapha excess state, and I don't know if you've always had this, maybe you're a pitta kapha, like a combination, a very strong combination of the two, but kaphas generally won't do well with damp stuff. And dairy is damp, cheese is damp, it's like moldy sometimes. So it can increase that phlegm. And that's why other dosha types can eat dairy and be absolutely fine. And it can be exacerbated if you're in a very cold but humid environment, damp environment. Years ago, you smoked. Alcohol intake very infrequently, only if I'm out with a friend for dinner. That's all good. If it's enjoyment, it's fine. If you can go without, that's all good. I'm not too concerned. Drug use, taking THC and CBD gummies to help me sleep. Okay. So I generally find that when people start processing their emotions as well, their sleep can just naturally regulate. So that's just something that I would note and mention. Weight, always up and down, but always trending up ultimately. I'd love this to stop. So this can be linked in with the Hashimoto's thyroiditis or the kapha dosha excess stuff that's going on at the moment. And again, physical body can influence emotional state. Likewise, emotional state can influence the physical state. And I have seen people drop weight regardless of where they're at. I have to say, when I'm working with people who are in this kapha excess, they do just take a little bit longer, and it's been patient. And I find that people in a kapha excess state often fear, because they're making slow changes, they get frustrated. They feel like they're letting their practitioner down because they're not making fast enough changes. And they're very fearful that their practitioner is going to give up on them as well. And some practitioners will, because they're like, why is this person not making a change? But when you understand the doshas, you can understand how the body's going to respond. And I definitely know that I'm a little bit more patient when I'm working with a client who's in a kapha excess, but I also have to give them a good nudge to do stuff that they might be procrastinating on. Okay, sleep pattern. If I don't take my night medications, I will be up every 45 minutes from pain and cramping while asleep. With medication, I sleep great. And so sometimes I meet people who are like, you know what, I want to get off this stuff. And I never say, right, let's just go cold turkey, or let's like dive in and start taking you off this stuff. That can be too much. And when the body's in pain, it can't process emotions. But naturally, what often happens is people get to a point where they realize they're not taking their stuff. They forget it, or they're like, right, I'm actually ready, versus their mind is telling them they shouldn't be on medication. So yeah, it's possible to wean off the stuff, but it's not a thing that I will get people to do. It's like if people have drug or alcohol addictions, I don't go in there the first session and tell them, cut down to 3 times a week and have this many drinks, or, you know, go cold turkey. That's just too much for someone. Process emotions, and then the decisions just naturally come, or the body's desire or need to take these things naturally come. Okay, exercise. Since starting my biz online, my life has become much more sedentary, and I tore up my ankle 10 months ago, so exercise has been hard. So even I look at the language people use when they write, and also the way they describe things too. I actually like to dance in Pilates and lift weights, except for dancing, I hate cardio. Interesting. Okay, so I'm all about finding exercise that suits you, and there, depending on the dosha type and where someone is at, there are more appropriate exercises rather than do this just because I tell you. Now, sometimes there are times after I've worked with someone, process their emotions, where it's like, you know what, you just have to go and do this thing, try it out for a couple of weeks. It's like getting back into running. It's hard. I hate it. Not that I run anymore, but I know it's hard and I hate it when I start, but it feels really good when you get better at it. Okay, so it's finding the type of exercise, and Pilates is really great, especially for the hypermobility and the body awareness as well. Now, if you actually have an amount of, like a decent amount of kapha in your normal constitution of your dosha makeup, kaphas, when they lift weights, will just get big. So I'm reading this thinking you must be, if you were to do a quiz, mainly Pitta with a lot of kapha, if not kapha, Pitta, the other way around. And I often say that the kaphas like dancing, Zumba, they like to have the people around them. If you've got this amount of Pitta in you, you also like to be the best. And sometimes if you're not the best, that can really get you down. So doing one-to-one work can be a really good in. And of course, like I sort of work with clients and their budget and what they can afford as well, because not everyone can afford to do one-to-one work. So energy levels are typically very good, and that's great considering Hashimoto's. Current stress levels. My dad has just had a knee replacement, so a bit higher than normal. Cool. And then sometimes I do go into family members and like, which knee? Right knee is the career knee. Left knee is a relationship knee. And the left knee is also how you're showing up and expressing yourself with your career. Okay, mood tendencies. Except for hormonal swings, I'm pretty rock solid. So I would be actually using these hormonal swings as an opportunity to go deeper. Like, what is the mood that comes up? Is it anger? Is it frustration? Is it melancholy and depression and sadness? And I would be using this as an opportunity to go deeper into, right, if I sit with this, what comes up for me to process? Okay, work. I love my work. I may switch to less Zoom calls so I have more freedom. Sounds good. So it sounds like there's a bit of a transition happening with business. Emotional history. I have healed so much emotional trauma, I can't think of any. Okay, so I don't have a lot of information to go off there, but what I will say is I still like to hear from people. What are the significant things that they have been through? Only, especially if I was to go further and work with someone, I have so many people tell me I've worked through this. And then when I take them through my facilitation, my release process, They're like, oh God, I thought I worked through this, but there's obviously still more there. And sometimes we check and it takes about 5 minutes and there is nothing there. And it's like, cool, you know what? Maybe you have worked through this. But I always just say, can I just facilitate it in this way? There's something there, there's something there. If not, all good. But whenever stuff is playing up in the body, or it's not just physical body, it's mental state, it's behavior, it's about your business life, it's about your personal life. If things aren't working right now to the optimum or what you're happy with, I do believe it's great to go back into the past and just explore. It can be a little bit tiring though, especially if you have done a lot of work on it too. And this is where I would possibly be able to link more of the past emotional trauma to some of the historical, like wrist injuries and the neck stuff. The neck isn't so much about when you had surgery, but when did it start giving you issues? Okay, relationship status, single and happy. Intimacy, I hired a matchmaker. Cool, good luck. And because I have highlighted some sacral chakra stuff going on here with the past history of fibroids, painful periods in the past, I would love to explore that because that ties into relationships and sex, money, and power, which has a lot to do with our business relationships as well. So significant historical relationships. My ex-boyfriend is now my best friend and roommate. No unrequited feelings. The soul brother I always wanted. Great. So no pregnancies, miscarriages, or abortions. No children, no birth, therefore. And friendships, I have the best friends ever. So it sounds like there's a lot of good things in the sacral chakra as well, which is cool. But okay, I just caught a glimpse of the next part where I ask about family structure and dynamics. So complicated, competitive. This is about siblings as well. Complicated, competitive, high performing. Parents still together and very much love each other, but most of my childhood, my father was volatile and there was a lot of emotional abuse. Okay, so volatile, I'm going to assume this is anger or just very emotionally all over the place. And anger is a really interesting state, behavior, emotion, feeling that I use to describe why we are sometimes having issues with our emotional expression, because there is healthy anger, which is very transformative. It helps us create, it helps us move forwards, it helps us take action. But when we have a dysfunctional relationship with anger, because we maybe weren't taught how to express it from our role models, our parents, then we may not ever be able to embrace the healthy anger. And this sometimes doesn't make sense until you go into the anger, which most people see as harmful, so they don't want to go there. So either we were surrounded by explosive anger, which could get so explosive that it becomes emotionally abusive, verbally, physically. And we either go and repeat that in the way we express ourselves to our friends, our family, and so on, our safe people, or we froze in that moment as kids around that anger and we just shut it down. And likewise, your parents, depending on their upbringing, can either be explosive or they can shut it down. And you can imagine when it's shut down, it's like, what is that? And it becomes really uncomfortable for people to actually process and express anger. And that's what I do in a release process, is this safe space to actually go there. And sometimes I need to feed ideas to people because it's just completely new to them. It's a new activity. It's the new exercise at the gym. It is a new emotion and a new emotional muscle to actually exercise. So there was a lot of emotional abuse, and I'm an incest survivor. Okay, so that is where if I was working privately, I would be going into this, and this is some stuff that, some people talk about and some people don't. And even though there's been a lot of emotional processing, if you're ready, then this is where I would dive into it and love to use the release process just to see if there is anything left around here as well. Okay. So we're getting to the end of this history. So no children, no desire to have children. Is there anything else you haven't shared? I dream of waking up pain-free. I dream of releasing the weight and keeping it off. Okay, so I always ask this question because sometimes people get through the whole history, and it is a little bit different when it's done in person, is that sometimes people are holding key things back that could be like one of the keys that unlocks so many of the issues that are manifesting. So it's like this domino effect. And it really is a space to talk about anything and everything. But dreaming of waking up pain-free, a dream of releasing the weight and keeping it off, I would definitely hold on to that intention and that desire, because desires are in the sacral chakra, which has come up a few times, and we all have the right to want and desire. And the demon of the sacral chakra is guilt. So you have the right to want and desire these things and dream of them without having any guilt, knowing that it's possible. Pain is, and in your pain, sometimes this doesn't land, but pain is a very emotional experience. It is a real experience, but it does, I find, correlate a lot with emotions, emotional state. And that's why I like to help people process their emotions and embrace them, even the really dark and negative ones. And these are the places that most people don't go. Some people go there, but still there's a layer deeper to work at. And when we have these intentions and desires, the way I operate is, great, I know where you want to head, and we're not going to bypass anything, but first we've got to go into the mess to be able to step into the person that you desire to be. And I feel like that this is possible, and it depends on when I get people on their journey, because not everybody is ready to do the work. But it does depend. When do I get someone on their journey? How all in are they prepared to go? And I would want to go into, or at least know a little bit more, or hear you talk about past emotional history, because the way we speak about things or don't want to speak about things tells me a lot as well. And I always think it's worth checking, which is why I do that with my clients, because if there's nothing there, it would take a few minutes. If there's something there, it still doesn't even take that long, depending on how quickly you grasp understanding how to process your emotions. And you can still be moving forwards with your business and your personal life and doing all these cool things whilst you are doing the deeper processing work as well. And what's really interesting is that people who maybe even don't relate to the emotional aspect, they can see the strong emotional link to their physical pain, because in the first few sessions that I work with people, it can amplify. And I'm good at pushing people, but being wary not to push them over the edge. But this is where you can recognize, my gosh, I just processed that event and I thought there was nothing there, but my gosh, I felt the pain in the moment, or a couple of days after, that pain just nailed me. And so that's what I'm there to help people interpret, how is their body responding? Because when you start to process emotions, especially from the past, that are carrying on into recurrent themes in the future, perhaps blocking you from what you really desire, the body can release in the most fascinating ways. I usually say physically, physiologically, and emotionally. So I really recognized the power of this work as I was working with people. As I said earlier, I never thought that you could actually resolve and not have any markers around an autoimmune condition. I believed that once you had this autoimmune condition, you had to live with it and manage it. But yeah, I've seen people who have gone under the best care for diets. They have tried every freaking diet under the sun. They've lost the weight, but they put the weight back on. And all of a sudden, they're not even doing anything big, but they're shifting tens of kilos of weight in a short period of time. And of course, we're making sure that they're not losing weight because of other reasons, like other sinister reasons. But weight that we carry, you can look at it based on location. So the chakra, is it all over the body, or is it mainly in particular areas that weight's being gained? Therefore, what does that area chakra represent emotionally? What emotions does it govern? And therefore, what are the emotions to process? Because the fat that we hold can be very numb, not have a lot of sensation, or it can be very sensitive. And when it's very sensitive, it's like, this is so ready to just like pop and come to the surface. But fat is protective. It's like this padding of emotions that are too hard to process and deal with. So I'm just going to bury them under there, and I'm going to put some padding around it just to protect it because I'm not quite ready yet. So yes, I'm considering there is the Hashimoto's thyroiditis. There is maybe some caffeinous that is in this person's dosha type, which is making them more predisposed to the gaining weight. So storing, hoarding things, emotionally eating, versus there are dosha types who will drop weight when they get really stressed. However, the stress is affecting them physically, physiologically, or emotionally. So location of weight, also considering the doshas, this is where this whole process is about trying to work out, is it physical, emotional, human, energetic, a dosha or a chakra imbalance? Sometimes it is a combination of all of the above. And sometimes I think it can be a chakra or a dosha. And then as I dive in, I find out it's a little bit more emotional. So it's a very fascinating process. The history tells a lot to me. The more detailed history and including the sides I can get, the better. Of course, we're going to forget some things in a history or not want to divulge things because some people don't really know what they're in for when they are having their history interpreted or going down this emotional path. But reading the history in this way and talking about it helps me connect the dots and just hear myself repeating myself. So there's a lot of Pitta and Kapha stuff going on here, and there is Solar Plexus, and also the sacral chakra has come up repeated times. So it's not about balancing the doshas and balancing the chakras, because that would be bypassing the emotional events that contribute to these chakras and doshas going out of balance. So it all comes back to processing emotions, doing the deeper work. It can be hard, it can be easy. Generally, it's pretty full on the first few sessions, but as long as you stick with it and ride the waves, including the pain that may come up, it doesn't always have to come up, but it may come up, then the grass is greener on the other side. So I would definitely hold that intention, that dream of waking up pain-free, dream of releasing the weight and keeping it off. I do believe it's totally possible. And definitely, celebrate any little milestones that come along the way. And part of this is also accepting the way your body is right now, so that you can hold more of the good stuff when you do have less pain and you do start to drop the weight as well. Because again, I'll say physical body influences emotional state and how we show up, is that if you start to drop the weight and you feel different, you can start to express yourself completely differently emotionally. And that's why we go through some of the dark stuff, to make sure that you can handle those transitions, because change can be quite challenging for people. So it's definitely possible. It is about accepting where you're at now. I find that a lot of people, when they go on this journey, they go from having an intense amount of frustration with their body to actually appreciating it. I never promise results of pain-free or dropping the weight, but have definitely had some pretty good success with clients. That would be setting up unrealistic expectations, but know that it is possible. I have experienced it. My clients have blown me away. But I have also said that this is about being more at peace with whatever is right now. And even just switching and really embodying that mentality can all of a sudden start to shift things, because your body is perfect because it is telling you something. It is an amazing barometer. You have many barometers going on here. But I am sure that you would actually be able to clear quite a few things. It's possible, including the psoriasis. I've worked with clients who have been able to clear their psoriasis. Sometimes it comes back, but they have an awareness of what has triggered it, and they know what they've got to come back to have it disappear again. All right, so I hope that that was insightful during this history interpretation for you, perhaps raise some awareness around some parts, and also let you know that it is quite connected using all these pillars that I teach around emotional processing, chakras, and doshas. And the energetic part comes into play when you're in the process and seeing how things change around you. Okay, so thank you so much for letting me interpret this history. I hope you got something out of listening to this individual's history interpretation. If this is something that you're interested in receiving, then head to the show notes and you will see a link that you can follow through. If there is availability, you will be able to go ahead and purchase a history interpretation. Please note that anything that you heard in this, even if you have similar conditions or levels of discomfort, that the interpretation is done for an individual. So what has happened here is not necessarily going to be advice for you, even if you experience the same or similar conditions, because we are all individual humans. I should, or probably should add in here, that if you are in any physical pain or if you have any major health concerns, it is always best to get these checked out by your healthcare provider. And that the history interpretation really is ideal for those who are able to take a level of responsibility for yourself. And I want you to be intentional as to why you might want your history interpreted. And yeah, just know that some things can come up when you have your history interpreted. There is no follow-up around it. It is that you trust that the information that you receive is what you need at that point in time. And of course, the more information you can give me, the better I will be able to interpret things for you in this moment in time. And whether or not you choose to do the deeper work, that's up to you. And that can be done in a one-to-one space. These are quite limited as well, and I only have intakes a couple of times a year. Otherwise, I do have group courses available as well.